Here's what I want to do now. I want to add some profile tabs so other users can view any recipes a user has submitted. This will take some time to do, so bear with me here. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the BP Core New Nav Item function. This function will add a tab to the profile page. This function can be found by going to Documentation Developer Resources. This page gives more of a technical overview for BuddyPress. You'll find a list of functions on the sidebar, one of them being the function I just showed you. Unfortunately, this example usage doesn't really explain everything to get started using it. Don't worry though, I'll explain the extra steps you need to take in order to use this function. Open the functions file and use an action hook called BP Setup Nav. This hook isn't documented by BuddyPress on their site, but this is the hook you need to use to begin setting up navigation items on the profile page. The function I want to call will be named JU BuddyPress Profile Tabs. As you may know, I like to stay organized. I'm going to create a folder inside the Includes folder called BuddyPress. This folder will include all functions and code related to extending and modifying BuddyPress. Inside this folder, I'm going to create a file named profile-tabs.php. I'm going to define the function here. Lastly, I'm going to include it from the functions file. Inside this function, we're going to need the global BP variable. This global variable is defined and provided to you by BuddyPress. The function we're about to call needs this variable so that it can function correctly. Next, let's call the function BP Core New Nav Item. It has one parameter, which is an array of settings. The first setting is the name, which we'll set to recipes. This will appear as the tab name. Make sure it's translatable as well. The next setting is the slug, which is what will be appended to the member URL. You'll see what this looks like in a minute. I'm going to set it to recipes. The next setting is the position. I'm going to set this to 100. This will determine the spot it appears in the menu. The lower the number, the chances are it'll appear first inside the menu. I want this to appear last, so I'm setting this to a high number. The next setting is the screen function. You can pass in the name of the function that will take care of displaying the content to the user when this page is loaded. I'm going to set this to JU Recent Recipes tab. Up next is the Show for Displayed User setting. This option will determine if the menu and page will appear if the page belongs to the current logged in user. If a user is logged in and they're viewing someone else's profile, should they be able to view this page, or is it just for the page owner's eyes? I'm going to set this to true. This will mean everyone will be able to see this page. The next setting is the Item CSS ID setting, which is just the ID attribute you can use to style this menu item. I'm going to set this to JU User Recipes. The very last setting is the default subnav slug that we'll set to recipes. This is for the submenu navigation. There are usually two navigation menus for profiles. If you were to look at the profile page, you'll see this main menu, and under it is another menu which is relative to the active main menu item. If I were to change the item in the primary menu, you'll notice the sub-navigation changes accordingly. You'll also notice our recipes menu item appearing now. I don't plan on having a sub-navigation menu, so I've decided to set the sub-menu to the same name as the primary menu. BuddyPress will be able to determine that there's no need for a sub-menu and that it doesn't have to worry about it. Before we move forward with displaying the content, I want to perform one check before we run this bit of code. The content I want to display will only display submitted recipe posts by the user. However, there is a chance that the admin will not even have this plugin installed or activated. If that's the case, I don't want to display this menu item. There are three solutions we can use. The first solution is to use the function exists function like we've always done. However, I want to take it a step further and check if the plugin is activated. The second solution would be to move all the BuddyPress code into the recipe plugin itself. While this might seem like a great solution and completely acceptable by BuddyPress, it does cause a problem with having the recipe plugin be usable with any theme. Keep in mind that plugins should be compatible with most themes by default. I only want this functionality to be available with my Udemy theme and nothing else. That's why we're doing all this in the theme itself. The third solution would be to check if the plugin is activated. This is very simple to do. This is the solution we'll be using. First, I'm going to create a new file inside the includes folder called utility.php. This file will contain all our utility functions. Utility functions are just normal PHP functions that really can't do anything by themselves but make it easier to process data. Make sure to include this file from the main functions file. Before we define a function, I want to make sure if it's been defined beforehand. I'm going to check if a function called JUPluginActivated exists. If it doesn't, we'll define it ourselves. This function will accept the plugin file name which will be required to use this function. Inside this function, we need to require the file wp-admin/includes/plugin.php. The function I want to use is not loaded on every page load. We'll need to include it ourselves just in case. Then, I'm going to return the value returned by the isPluginActive function. We'll pass in the plugin file name. This is a WordPress function that will check if the plugin we passed in is activated and installed. You can think of the function we just made as a sugar function because it's just a shorthand way of writing these two lines of code into one line. It's also common practice to check if certain utility functions have already been defined. I've been in situations where I've developed multiple plugins for the same site. This has resulted in me reusing functions. Checking if a function has already been defined is a good way to prevent collisions with your own code. With the function defined, let's use it. Inside the Profile tabs file, let's use a conditional statement and call the utility function we just created. The plugin file name is the file path relative to the plugin's directory. In our case, it would be recipe and then the main plugin file, which is the index.php file. If this function returns false, we're going to simply return the function, preventing it from executing the rest of this code. Now that we've got that established, we can begin to display the actual content. I'm going to create a brand new file inside the includes/BuddyPress directory called profile-posts.php. Define the screen function we passed into the tab function, which should be JURecentRecipes tab. Lastly, include this file from the functions file. Inside this function, we have to do three things. We are allowed to just start outputting content, but that's not really the correct way to do things. BuddyPress is a plugin that is easily extendable. If you looked through any of the templates, you'll notice there were a lot of do action and apply filters functions spread throughout the code. This means that BuddyPress even allows other developers to extend it like we're doing right now. Creating tab pages is no different. We should allow developers to extend this tab page just like any other BuddyPress page. Luckily, it's pretty easy to do. I want to call the function bpCoreLoadTemplate. This function will load a core template from BuddyPress with fallback support. The template that's loaded depends on the string you pass in. Before I pass in a string, I want to filter it. We have to use the applyFilters function. The filter hook I want to call is bpCoreTemplatePlugin. This is a BuddyPress hook that other developers can use to modify the path of a template. Specifically, this will modify the path to the plugin template. The plugin template is a very special template in BuddyPress. Its purpose is specifically for plugins. Plugins get a template to load their content. The path to this template is members/single/plugins. Let's take a look at this template. Inside the BuddyPress plugin, let's open this template file. Here is what BuddyPress says about this plugin inside this blog comment. Third-party plugins should use this template to easily add template support to their plugins for the members component. This is the template that will load our plugin's content. I'm fine with the way it is, so I'm going to leave this template as is. Now the question is, how do we load our content inside this template? Well, if you scroll down this template, you'll find two calls to the BP Nouveau member hook function. We won't go down the rabbit hole for this function because there's quite a bit going on with it. I'll just explain what they do. You pass in a value and it'll prepend the text BP_template_. Then it'll call the doAction function and trigger a hook for you to use. The first example will trigger the BP template title hook, and the second example will trigger the BP template content hook. You can use these hooks to load your content. It's important to understand that this template is meant for plugins other than BuddyPress. BuddyPress does not use this page for its own pages. Because of this, we're expected to use these hooks ourselves to load our content. Normally, we would open the functions file and hook into these two hooks, but these two hooks are available on most templates. This is a problem as we could potentially divide or display information that we don't want to. We only want our code to apply to the recipe page. Luckily, we don't have to use the add action function in just the functions file. Back inside the tab function, I'm going to call the add action function twice for both hooks. I'm going to pass in the two hooks and call the functions JUBuddyPress recent posts title and JUBuddyPress post content respectively. Since the screen function will only run if the tab is clicked and loaded, we can safely assume these two hooks will only be added and called at this point too. This code will be placed right before we load the template since the template is the one calling these two hooks. Right below this code, I'm going to define both functions. The title function will just have a div tag with the class text center. My text will be my recipes. The content function will have a list of the recipes the user has submitted. The first thing I want to do is grab the ID of the current profile. Create a variable called profileUserID and assign its value returned by the function BPDisplayedUserID, which will grab the ID of the current user profile. I'm going to make a conditional statement to make sure this ID is not empty. If it is empty, we'll simply return the function and not display anything at all. Now that we have an ID, I'm going to create a new variable named posts, which will be a custom query. There are only three things I want to set. The first is the author, which will be set to the user ID. We only want to grab posts based on the profile being viewed. Then I want to set the posts per page setting to 10. I only want the 10 most recent posts. Since this is a custom post type, we have to set the post type to recipe so that it'll only grab recipe posts. Then, just like any other loop, I'm going to begin the process of looping through all of this. Nothing new so far. I only want to output the excerpt. Luckily, we don't have to rewrite the code for that. If you can recall, we already have a template for excerpts. I'm going to call the getTemplatePart function and pass in partials/post/content-excerpt, which will use the template part we use in the index template. Lastly, I'm just going to reset the data using the WP_reset_post_data function. Let's check out the recipe tab now. Everything is coming out great except that the images are a bit too big. We really don't need all this space. I'm going to adjust my template a bit. I'm going to wrap my loop with two sets of div tags. I'll apply the ID post to the first div with the classes rowJustifyContentMDCenter. The second div tag will have the classes COLMD8. The classes I'm currently applying are Bootstrap classes. I recommend you check out the Bootstrap documentation to learn more about these classes. All they do is center the content for us. Refresh the page and you should see everything looking a bit better. The classes I just used are Bootstrap classes and are not specific to WordPress or BuddyPress in any way. Let me go over what happened. The first thing we did was tell BuddyPress about a new menu item we'd like to add. If a user clicks on this menu item, then the screen function will be called. The screen function does a few things. What we want to do is display our content. There are a couple of ways to go about this. We could, if we wanted to, just output HTML directly from the function. That's perfectly fine. However, it's always good practice to make the page match the site and allow other plugins to extend the page if they need to. BuddyPress provides a template for plugins to use so that plugins don't have to worry about a lot of the markup or calling any required functions. A special thing about this template is that there are action hooks called at certain points to allow developers to display content. That's exactly what we do here. We use those action hooks. Specifically, we hook into the title and content action hooks. The functions that are called will output a title and the content respectively. It's a lot of work, but well worth the effort. That should do it for now. Let's continue on to the next lecture.